Hello and good afternoon to our new economy shortcut. In this time again, cooperation with the OECD. And hello, Nicola, already. Glad to have joined this time again to do this very special end of year, short before next year, podcast on a very important topic, which has driven my mind in whole year in a very disturbing way. As for those who have lived in Germany in the German debates 20 years ago around the Agenda 2010, it very much reminds the situation at the time when Germany sometimes has a tendency to go ahead with a very, let's say, romantic way of economics and to lose itself into a highly self-destroying picture making of what is going on in Germany, and then with a lot of downward spirals and end of Germany and end of the German economy. At some point, then entering fields where it doesn't fit with the numbers and empirics. And this is important, and we have lived that through in Germany. Nearly every talk show has been on, if it was on economics, it was always the same debates on the downturn and the end of the German economy. And this is important and very highly important because it's not only a question of seriousness of the analysis, but also about what does it produce. At some point, it may be self-fulfilling. At some point, that's been the case in after 2005, as one could see, and may at some point be the case today. And it may lead to the wrong conclusions, to the wrong policy advices, because if you don't see the right angle, then you may end up in the wrong policy, and that's maybe something where we have lived through in Germany in the last couple of months, having very engaging debates on bureaucracy, on Bürgergeld, and so on, and very little about maybe the more important things like the trade wars, international situations, and the things. So what we would like to do today in somewhat more than an hour is to dig deeper into that and to question the narrative and to check what is really at stake in Germany, what are the real problems, and what are the real recipes to maybe start better into next year. I'm happy to have you three on the podium, on the digital podium. And I would like to introduce first Erik Nielsen, who is a very known international economist and who is now based in London, who has been at the UniCredit and other big banks following also the German economy, but also macroeconomics in more general terms. We have Nicola Brandt, as said, partnering this event, leading the Berlin Center, OECD Berlin Center, and Sebastian Green from IMK, Institute for Macroeconomics and Konjunkturforschung. I doesn't get the English. You can add this Sebastian. Erik has written a very inspiring piece going against the general mood quite recently, and that's why we invited you to give us a short overview why you don't believe in a very pessimistic view and what are your arguments why Germany might be better than a lot of people think today. Would you please go ahead?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I think let me outline why I think Germany is in a not as seriously bad place as people seems to think. This is not to say that Germany doesn't face lots of challenges. It is the model that has guided Germany for many years of being an export-led economy is probably not sustainable in this new world. But all of Europe, like Germany, and particularly Germany, but also the small northern Europeans with big current account surpluses, have been hit by this completely new world of Donald Trump and with threats all over. So adjustment have to be made. But here's the key point why I think the narrative and the debate has gotten off track. When you speak with people in Germany and Europe generally, and America for that matter, the narrative seems to be that since COVID, and maybe even longer, Germany has not really grown, and it is a question of the world has changed, and bureaucracy and regulation had been such, had come to a stage now where it kills growth. I don't know how one verifies that as an economist, but what I do know is the following, and those are all quite easily identifiable and quantifiable events that happened. So since around the end of COVID to over the last 3-4 years, Germany was hit by a terms of trade shock of something like 7-8%. So this is export prices divided by import prices, in other words, and that's a commodity price shock primarily. And if you compare that to the US, they had a terms of trade gains of virtually the same magnitude. So keep that pin in that one. At the same time, fiscal policy in Germany and in the rest of Europe for that matter was tightened, not substantially, but tightened by 1% or 2 percentage points of GDP over this period of time. Under normal circumstances, we know what that cost to growth. And again, compared to the United States, they had a massive fiscal easing, started under Biden and continued now under President Trump. And we can discuss the multipliers, but fundamentally we know something about this. In reaction to the price shock, the commodity price shock, we had the toughest monetary tightening in ECB history, the fastest and the most severe. That was done because it was seen as important to show, or to, let me put it this way, to anchor inflation expectations. I think that's probably right. We can discuss it, but nobody can argue that such a monetary tightening is not bad for growth for a while. It may be short-term pain for long-term gain. We haven't really seen the gain yet. And then while the US had a less severe tightening relative to the inflation shock and underlying domestic demand at the time, that in a sense, the tightening in America of monetary policy countered to some extent the fiscal expansion. So there was this sort of balancing of this. And then fourthly, Europe was hit by the shock to confidence and to the outlook by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and threat to Europe. And America was far away from that. So when I look at those factors, I don't know quite how to quantify the impact of the increase in uncertainty and fear in households and businesses, but I have a fairly good sense and experience and knowledge, we all have, of the effect on the economy of the terms of trade shock, the fiscal tightening, and the monetary tightening. And I would argue, when you look at those, I would characterize the German, broadly speaking, flat growth over the last few years as a sign of resilience, not weakness. It was enormous shock, external and policy shocks. When I now look forward, the good news is they are basically all changing, right? The terms of trade shock has turned into a positive gain, although energy prices in Germany are still higher than before this whole started, but it has come down a lot, and there is some lagged effect of that. The fiscal is on OECD data, just changing from a tightening of about 0.5% of GDP last year to this year to about 0.5% easing next year in terms of fiscal impulses. And the monetary policy has, of course, been eased significantly. So we know this. The uncertainty indices, those we can track, are coming down, but I would not dare guess what's happening on that front. So that still sits out there. But certainly we are seeing a reversal of the three quantifiable effects. So I think my argument is that when for example, the OECD forecast about 1% growth in Germany next year. I think that's too pessimistic. I think the impulse of the delayed effect of the monetary easing, the lags in the system that we know usually, and the fiscal policy. And we can come back to this. I'm fully familiar with the German debate. Whether is this now for investment, or are they going to just spill it away in consumption and what have you? But so we can discuss the multipliers a little bit. But it's very clear that there's a big fiscal push coming. So altogether, I think that those promise very well for growth into 2026 in Germany, notwithstanding the fundamental issues of dealing with Trump, the US, China, and all the rest of it. But we can maybe leave that if you want. I'm happy to go into some of that. But fundamentally, my bottom line of all this is I know how stuff we are experienced with. We can debate the details of, but I can identify clear shock that explains a drag on the economy, and they are turning. The other stuff of regulation, over-regulation, and over-bureaucracy and stuff, I have a lot to say, but I'll leave it for now. But and there are maybe some in it. But why don't we start by recognizing what we can identify?
Thank you very much, Erik. And be it for being quite different from what we hear day by day in Germany, which doesn't mean that the one or the other is true, but I think you have some very good arguments and much more based on quantifiable factors, as you mentioned. I would hand over to Nicola. As I understood, I put you as the OECD forecasting, much too pessimistic on Germany.
Well, so we do, I mean, maybe it's too pessimistic. I don't know. We will see. Time will show. But let's say, because if I go back to the title of this event, is it a deep crisis or a pity party? Maybe that's a bit, provocative. But I would say, well, we do see a recovery in growth in Germany, and this is basically, as Erik has said, that there are some things that hit Germany and Europe negatively are going to ease now. We do see that there's going to be more spending, public spending. We also saw over the course of the year a decrease in policy uncertainty. But here I would like to say, I mean, it's important to see, of course, that Germany is very dependent on exports, that uncertainty on that front is still ongoing, and that then in the domestic domain, it's a bit unclear, or at least the rhetoric isn't so clear whether or the public debate, whether the reforms that are needed, that we see as needed, are going on. Although we do see a lot of that. So there's this, well, how do you call it? Sondervermögen, sovereign wealth fund, you wouldn't say, right? But there's the money set aside for more investment. We do think it's important to use it for more investment, to create capacity at the municipal level, because a lack or an investment backlog at the public level, but also at the private level, is holding back the economy. And we do think there are opportunities. So if some of the reforms, and so Erik seemed to suggest that there's no problem at all with bureaucracy, or I don't know what you said, maybe we should come back to that. But so we think it's very positive that some procedures already have been accelerated. So in order to really use the money that has been set aside for public investment and enhance private investment, we do see it as important to accelerate procedures to allow investment to actually happen. We do see it as important, as I said before, to strengthen the capacity, in particular at the municipal level, to bring about the investment that is needed. And we also think it is positive that there is this modernization agenda also helping to ease procedures and to allow for more digital public administration, because this is an area where Germany is less advanced than other OECD countries. But the upside, of course, is that this is happening. So that's important. I'm in terms of perhaps I don't want to say much more, but just to say that, of course, in terms of challenges, there are changes compared to what we have seen apart from the shocks that Erik has just mentioned. So for a long time now, Germany has benefited a lot from the fact that China was importing many of the goods, so investment goods, cars, etc., that Germany has been good at producing and exporting. And here the game has a little bit changed, right? Because China caught up in the domain of e-vehicles, for example. It's more of a competitor now. That needn't be a bad thing, but of course it's a big change from what was before. And it's a challenge that Germany needs to address. Also in terms of, if you want to move more to e-vehicles, you need the loading infrastructure, etc. And this transition is a bit more difficult in Germany at the moment than, for example, in China. Another point that I want to make, if I look at the OECD migration outlook, so in the past, in the 2010s, Germany benefited a lot from migration, relatively skilled migration, immigration from other European countries. And at least for the moment, this has changed, which is partly perhaps due to the to the difficult years that are behind Germany. But of course, that's another positive impulse that is now lacking for the moment. All of this to say that there are certainly challenges, and the transition ahead of Germany and Europe is big. But of course, the country has shown big potential also to be innovative. And what is important is to leverage this potential now. And what we see as very important there is, of course, policies in Germany, but also in all of Europe, basically using the internal market in Europe much more to allow the continent, European countries, to innovate. And this will require advancing, the capital market union, but also enhancing the internal market, which is still quite fragmented further. And then, of course, it can work. So the picture is nuanced, I would say. Lots of challenges, big, as Erik said, big negative shocks that have been hitting the country, but also big challenges ahead. Another one that I didn't mention is, of course, demographics. And this is why the immigration picture is important. There are perhaps potentials to mobilize more workers, women, older workers also within the country. But it requires the right policies, which we can talk about later. So I would say, I just leave it there, and I'll be curious to say how we discuss this issue further.
Okay, thanks, Nico. I think one of the points that Erik has made is also about, and that's what I always find interesting or find important, to identify the causes of the situation and then address them. What we have in Germany is a little bit the situation that everyone comes in with, this could be reformed, that could be reformed, which is okay. We can do a lot of things, but maybe that's not the best way to go ahead if we want to really solve the problems. That's maybe the question that we keep in mind. And Sebastian, please, your input.
Yes, let me try to share some slides. I did not coordinate with Eric, but I have some slides which I think can illustrate some of the points he has been making, because the story he just presented here is pretty much the same my institute has been pushing for the past years as well. I mean, there are some differences in detail. So we at the terms of trade shock, well, around 6%, I think, when we did that, but I think this is more detailed. But I would like to show you some pictures. I mean, the story you hear in Germany at the moment in public debate is that, well, there's so much regulation, the social system is so expensive that is the reason Germany is not growing anymore. And what you see here on the graph is real GDP per capita from 2000 until 2025. And what's in my eyes interesting is that from 2000 to 2019, we had basically the same growth as the United States. Yeah, and if I show this to other people, they are usually a bit surprised because they say, well, that can't be true. But if you look into the data, it is true. What happens then, and that is what Eric refers to, after 2020, well, the US powers ahead, and Germany does not. And actually, Germany is now then doing worse than the Netherlands, if you take it on long-term perspective. It's still doing better than France and the UK. So what has happened here, and our explanation is a bit what Eric said, the large shocks, and behind the large shocks is shifting geopolitical and geoeconomic environment. China and the US, they are becoming more rivals. They do their own industrial and trade policy to increase domestic industrial production. And then Russia just happens to disappear as energy supplier. And that really explains what's happening there. And then from 2024 onwards, we have a restrictive fiscal policy, and we have the restrictive monetary policy that Eric referred to. So second point, and this, I hope, illustrates a little bit what's going on the export side. I mean, I think we have a big story that China has decided to become more inward-looking, more independent from foreign imports. And well, China and the US, or the US and China, have been the most important export markets for the US. And if you look at this chart here, or the table here, these are export of goods by different categories for the first half of 25 compared to the first half of 24. And you see that we really have a huge drop in exports to the US and to China. Vehicles minus 37.6% to China. That is quite significant. And for chemical products here, this is a supply side issue because they have become much more expensive to produce given the high energy prices. And of course, then the big multinationals shift production to other countries. So that basically reflects what's going on here. And the question is now, what can we do about it? And if you look at China, and if the story is correct that the Chinese government does not want to have German suppliers in certain key strategic sectors, then cutting social expenditure in Germany does not help. I mean, if you cut wage costs by 1 or 2 percentage points, that's not what's going to make the government in Beijing to rethink their strategy on strategic imports. So why are we a bit more optimistic than most of the others? I mean, we have roughly 1.5% of growth for next year. That's not that far from the other projections, at least not from some of them. A reason is really the fiscal stance. The fiscal stance is really expansionary next year. And what you see on the right-hand side is a simulation we did with NIGEM. This is not growth rate, but that is deviation from the baseline. So we think that this will add about 1% of GDP in level terms. Now, is that a lot? Is that not? Well, you can discuss that, but we also believe that the potential growth is higher than what is currently estimated by the Council of Economic Advisors. For example, productivity in construction has declined in Germany by 25% over the past 4 years. And we believe this is a sign of unused capacities. We don't believe that the construction workers suddenly have become a quarter less productive in such a short time span. And therefore, If demand recovers here, we think that there's also a chance of higher growth. And I would always say, don't underestimate a proper fiscal impulse. Fiscal consolidation has most of the time worked as we would expect it to work, by slowing the economy. And if you have a fiscal impulse of 1.1%, 1.2% of GDP, you will see something there. And we believe this would be a proper growth rate. There's one last factor why we believe that Germany might do better than some people expect, and that is the saving ratio. We believe that the households have space to increase consumption, and that is now a bit technical. What you see on the chart here to the right-hand side is the gross and the net savings ratio. Gross is on top, net is below. For saving ratios, the difference between gross and net is the depreciation of your housing stock, of your self-used housing. Yeah, and so what you see here, if we don't include the depreciation of housing, German households are still saving significantly more than prior to COVID. If we include that, they are not. I mean, the French usually report gross, Germans focus on the net rate. Why is that important at the moment? Well, why is depreciation obviously has gone up if the gap has gone up? And that is because replacement values of your houses have gone up. But if you live in your own apartment or your own house and nothing else has changed, your income has increased, prices have increased, and therefore you would have to pay more for the replacement of your house. We doubt that households really take that fully into account for their spending decisions. And therefore, we believe that the gross savings ratio is more relevant at the moment. There's space for the increase in consumption. So, I mean, to summarize, if things go well, we might see the first domestically driven recovery in Germany since 1990. I'm saying if things are going well because we believe that the discussion about cutting pensions, cutting welfare, cutting everything might actually create uncertainty here and is harmful at the moment. But nonetheless, we see an upswing starting next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sebastian. Maybe we can just immediately switch back to you, Erik. You mentioned at the end of your introduction that you might come back to the discussions about bureaucracy and else. Maybe linking this to the thing that Sebastian is saying. I mean, it's important to have a good analysis and diagnosis of what is happening, and there has been high uncertainty, as you mentioned, in the German economy and in the broader public in the last couple of months, which leads to people to not spend money. And one of the reasons might be, whatever the international context, it might also be the discussion we have about, the end of the German model, the end of Germany, the economy, and the need to reform and to have harsh reforms. And I mean, who wonders when Germans now get very careful about spending money if they hear day by day that they have to cut expenses or pensions will be reformed and so on. So, Erik, what is your take on this, on bureaucracy and other more structural reforms? You're muted.
Thanks, sorry about that. Let me start by telling you that when I really became a Wahlberliner 10 years ago, because we loved the city, and I started taking German classes. One of the first things my teacher taught me was that wir müssen sparen. So this is the German archetypical kind of argument. And he had on his tape recorder, Wolfgang Schauble, who on repeat could be saying the same thing again. I think Sebastian's charts on the saving ratios are really important, because I don't do point estimates like the OECD and Sebastian seems to do anymore, but I have looked through numbers, and I would definitely think that there is a fairly good chance that Germany will get boosted not only by the fiscal, but by next year, but also by private consumption for a change. Because wages are going up and inflation have come down, sort of thing. So I would subscribe to this. Now, on bureaucracy, maybe the most important thing I think I would like to put across is what Nicola referred to on digitalization, where Germany is definitely behind. Again, I can tell you as a Dane, when I just 3-4 years ago, I bought a piece of land in Denmark. I got permission to build a house, regulation, of course. I got it approved. I got the mortgage, and at no time did I have to leave my desk here in London. Everything is digital. Everything, the bank, the official sector, everything. So there is a lot there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, but we can talk about why that is so. Now, what I referred to when I said let's also keep it in perspective is that I would characterize the call you hear in the media and by obviously many people for deregulation and simplification or what have you, because this is what holds growth back, as one of these things where everybody is very long on opinions and very short on facts. What does it actually mean? So I would challenge anybody to show me good examples of simplification or deregulation that they don't think is important anymore. I mean, these are all been introduced for a reason, right? And talking about the OECD, in the OECD Economic Outlook published, I think just a week ago, there's a wonderful chapter on regulation, comparing a very detailed comparison of the cost in terms of manpower to dealing with regulatory burdens in the business sector across many countries in the world. And the thing that struck me was it has become worse in Europe on the OECD's estimates or matrix index, but marginally from about 3.7 index to 3.9 index. I mean, so 15 years ago to 3.9. And the level is the same as example given Australia. It is higher than the United States at 3.1 as a mean number, but there's a great variety depending on economic activity, how much regulation there are, and or how big the burden is of dealing with this. And in Europe, this is for Europe, not Germany specifically, mind you. The bottom, the easiest regulated 1/3 is less regulated than the highest regulated 1/3 in America, for example. So it's difficult to sort of bring it into something concrete. But I would suggest that to everybody who says that regulation is a big burden, and I'm sure it is, and I'm sure bureaucracy is a burden. It is by definition. But one, I think, for the debate needs to be very concrete and give examples of it. We may decide that things that made sense to regulate and report on 15 years ago, 10 years ago, is no longer there. But it is not quite clear that this is the society Germany wants today. But it is. But I think this is a debate that's worth happening rather than simply argue that this is why Germany doesn't grow. Last thing, Germany is capable of changing, and it is changing, and Germany needs to change to this new world. But as a good example is exactly as one of you referred to before, the over-dependence on Russian energy. Then comes 2022, and within a year, it's basically weaned off. I mean, it's who in the world would have predicted in end of 2021 that Germany will need to basically stop using Russian energy and can do this within a year, about 14 months or whatever the number exactly, or down to 5% or whatever. This is a fantastic example of government and civil society and businesses basically coming together in a sense and steering it. So I believe, I mean, Stelzenmeyer at Brookings famously said Germany's problem was that Germany had outsourced energy to Russia, markets to China, and defense to America. True, maybe to a degree. The energy side is gone, and given the budget and the numbers that's now being put forward in Germany, I would suggest that a good chunk of the dependency on American defense can also be addressed in a relatively short period of time, because the economy is fundamentally a highly sophisticated economy, which has adopted before, and I would be surprised if it can't do it again.
Thank you. Maybe Nicola, I know you're not responsible for every word that's been written, but still, what Erik is quoting, looking as you do at a lot of countries, even if you're sitting in Germany, and comparing, isn't it quite astonishing how the differences are made if indeed in the end there are so many other countries who have a lot of bureaucracy, if I put it like this, Erik, and how can this explain such a difference in the last 3 or 4 years, that suddenly Germany is always at the bottom of the growth list, and not the others. Do you have any idea on this, any explanation?
Well, that I don't think anybody has said, at least not at the OECD, the fact that growth has been so slow is due to bureaucracy only. And it's also true, and that basically businesses and citizens almost everywhere in the OECD perceive bureaucracy as being too high. We have and past efforts to reduce it as too low. So certainly that's not explaining anything, and that's not what we are saying in our reports on Germany. But what you have to say is, because, well, Erik asked us to be very concrete, that even in the past, the money that has been set aside for public infrastructure spending, often it was not fully spent because of many sorts of procedures. So municipalities couldn't call on the funds fast enough because there was a lack of capacity and complicated procedures. Sometimes big investment projects are seen to be very extended. I'm sure in other countries as well. But if you say that one important thing is really to make up for the investment backlog in Germany, the infrastructure investment backlog, it's important to make sure that it actually happens, right? And this is why we say it's important to accelerate procedures. And Erik is right, quite right. We've seen it in some areas, for example, to adjust to the energy shock. So there's no reason to believe that it wouldn't be possible in other areas. But I do think, we do think that there's a lot of potential to have, not deregulate, but have better regulation. Just to give me one example, if you think about energy infrastructure, renewable energy, there's some tension, but also building infrastructure. We have a housing problem, right? We need to extend or Germany needs to extend its energy infrastructure to be able to integrate more renewable energy. And one thing that can hold it back are procedures, environmental procedures. They are there for a very good reason, right? So you don't want to lose biodiversity too much. So there's a trade-off to be made. But you can simplify and improve it by going for population-based approaches for biodiversity. So you don't have to protect it in every place. You just make sure that the population isn't endangered. And there's lots of examples like that where you can improve things. And we think it's important that Germany and other countries seize these opportunities.
I think that's something we had in a former New Economy shortcuts when we discussed on bureaucracy, and it seems quite smart to say, okay, there are good reasons to reduce regulation, but it's also to to better define when and when not, and not to have it as a amalgam, as something which always helps or never helps. So that's sure. I mean, that's very important to have these discussions also in the sense of this investment program, to make it more effective and to make fiscal policy more effective in that sense. But we don't have only the discussion about bureaucracy. We have weeks and weeks. We had discussions on Bürgergeld, and now we have a lot of weeks we have been discussing on pension. Is there something in there which could help us, Sebastian? I know principally you wouldn't agree, but handling this problem now, is that in the end helpful to make the perspectives more foreseeable or whatever?
No, I mean, on the Bürgergeld, I think that is really a marginal problem at the moment. I mean, Friedrich Merz thought he could deliver large savings in the budget. He now has found out that it's not possible. But even if we think about labor supply, it's not the Bürgergeld recipients who have been unemployed for 10 years who we need at the moment. I mean, the problem at the moment, in my eyes, is really one of insufficient demand and the problems in the international markets, the demand for exports. The pension that might or might not become a problem in the future, depending very much on migration. It's true at the moment we have little migration, but if you look at the average of the past 10 years, past 20 years, we had a lot of migration. And if you go back, that has never been forecast. So if you go to each of our official population projections, they all have been too low. The only one which has now been revised downwards is the one of 2022, because we had a new census and they found out that there were less people living in Germany than before. And now also they now say, well, look, this year we have less immigrants, net migration, so we take our assumption down. And they take the assumption down. Suddenly there are 3 million migrants less expected over the next 20 years or so. And of course, that makes a difference. And but we don't know whether that will actually materialize that well. I mean, I always thought business cycle forecasters are bad, but if you look at the demographics, it's much worse. I mean, these are so volatile, the projections, and they are so far off the mark. And whether pensions are a problem in 2050, or 2060, that is not really something which, in my eyes, has much of an impact to the situation at the moment. And that this is a bit, I mean, if you listen to the talk shows, they are saying the most pressing problem at the moment is to get a pension reform. I would say no. I mean, that might be a problem, but the most pressing problem is where we are now, and that manufacturing is under a huge amount of pressure from abroad. And how do we address that? And how do we get the economy going again?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, that's something each and every time I would agree. Listening to the usual wording when you listen to the pension reform debates in Germany, it's the numbers are on the table. The problem is known. We know everything. And that's so wrong. I mean, it's exactly what you said, and it's worth looking into the forecasting of demographics, which is always, as you said, very dubious and very wrong in the end. So maybe there's a problem, but we don't know exactly what it is. Eric, there are other countries reforming pensions or having reformed pensions. Denmark is one example that maybe it's not your focus, but you're Danish, so maybe you can say a word on this. We have very often heard in recent weeks that the Danish are our example, and they now work until 70. Maybe you can a personal and or a general word on this.
Sure. I mean, I think the pension issue is important for all of Europe. In my assessment, and whether it's number one or number two or number three, I don't know. But it is something that any society with a declining population need to think about, and particularly as, regrettably, in my view, the immigration debate has come to a stage where there is not much to hope that we can solve the problem from immigration, sort of. So this has to be adjusted. For those who don't know what Denmark has done, and I think you're right to say this is a model that many countries could think hard about replicating. They have linked the retirement age to the forecast for life expectancy. So life expectancy in Denmark is estimated and or tracked every 5 years, and on those occasions that then guides the retirement age, but with a long lag, of course. So the 70-year retirement age that's now announced came in place earlier this year when one of these 5-year updates took place, and we learned to our great pleasure that we are living longer and healthier life than ever. Then this means that, and I forget exactly when, but sometime in about 10 years' time, the retirement age will be 70. It seems completely reasonable to me. I mean, there is the fact that we have made in Europe fantastic progress in life expectancy. By the way, in as opposed to America, where they are lacking now about 4 years behind Germany in terms of life expectancy. Very little progress has been made, if any. But we made this enormous progress, and we have made life not only longer but healthier. So the whole idea, if you just think about a life expectancy of 82, 83 at birth today, which probably will end up being revised even further higher, at least on most people's guess today, short of war or pandemics or other things. The number of years that one contributes to society or to your own living becomes a smaller share of your life. I mean, nobody expects you to contribute the first 20 or 25 years as you educate yourself. You can talk about who pays for that, but fundamentally, that is given by society. Then you produce, and then you live off pensions, which of course is where the big burden comes. Pension reforms can also and should, in my opinion, be designed after the general 3-pillar system, where you have a minimum survivable thing provided by the public. And there's a political view, obviously, but not a controversial one. And then a publicly supported financial incentive to build private pension money on top, and then the normal extra savings anybody would like to have. So those are all important, but in terms of retirement age, I think, as you said, I think the Danish system, you can discuss the details, of adjusting retirement age according to life expectancy or some other objective indicator along the line, I think makes a lot of sense.
But very importantly, because that mixes with our topic today, what we heard in Germany very often in the last couple of weeks, I heard in talk shows and so on, look at the Danish, they did it and it works. If I understand, you just decided it, and you have to see, even if you are convinced, and one may be convinced of the system, it's not yet there. It's not, to be seen if that works in a whole sense. So that's just a tiny important difference. It's important. It's very interesting to follow the example, but not yet there to demonstrate results. Nicola.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to echo what Erik said and just say, I mean, we do see the demographic challenge for all OECD countries, really. And it is a challenge, of course, in terms of fiscal sustainability, but also in terms of availability of skills and ability to innovate. And I think in many ways, it's such a huge change, this very happy event of having longer and healthier lives. But I think we still have to reinvent our labor markets and perhaps even entrepreneurship to allow for people, now we consider, we are all on the screen considered older workers, right? And and it comes with problems. Well, if you just stay in your jobs, that's fine, that works. And we can see that we have seen it in Germany, by the way, as well. If you increase the statutory and retirement age, that's a very powerful reform. And you can see employment rates go up. On an individual level, if as an older worker you lose your job, that can be a lot unhappy, right? So I think that there are many changes that are needed there to think about working lives very differently, to think about there's no, by the way, there's no evidence that you're less innovative when you're older. You're more expensive most of the times, that's true. So I think many changes are needed there in order to increase the skills availability. So immigration can be, of course, one lever, but we also know that it needs, I mean, it's not no magic bullet. If more people with different backgrounds come into a country, you need housing, you need education that's adapted, etc. And here, so if you want to play that lever, you need to also make those investments to make it work. So that's important. That doesn't mean you shouldn't use it. You should, but you should be clear about the accompanying investments that are needed. Otherwise, you create a lot of tension in society. There's another lever, at least in Germany, which is hours worked by women in particular. I think a lot can be done there. But again, that requires better education and care systems. And I'm not sure whether there's a danger, I think, with birth rates going down, that basically now there are not enough places and daycare, etc., and that then municipalities will or Länder will reduce. Try to make savings, which we've seen in the past. Sebastian pointed out quite rightly that populations projections weren't right, and we schools were closed that are now needed, were later needed. So here it's very important to be clear about what is needed in order to make skills available in future generations and in current generations of parents, for example. And again, I agree with Erik that, and we say that increasing statutory retirement ages, reducing incentives to retire early would be a good idea for almost any country, but including Germany. And bolstering capital-based pension pillars like occupational pensions, for example, would also be a good idea because, in fact, in particular, at the lower end of incomes, the replacement rates through pensions is not particularly high in Germany. So you need to add something there to make sure that there's pension adequacy as well. So again, these are long-term structural issues that need to be addressed. There are lots of opportunities in there, but they need work also to be exploited.
Okay, there's someone in the audience. I would ask him, but before I would ask to Erik again, and maybe Sebastian too. I come back to your basic diagnosis and to the reasons of, and I mean, all we can say about bureaucracy and retirement ages and so on. I found it quite convincing that these are not really able to explain, these problems are not explained. Germany has not a difficult phase in the last 3 years because of retirement problems. Neither probably because of bureaucracy or Bürgergeld. So what it is it if you are a doctor and you identify some reasons for problems, and then the thing the doctor would do is to try and make it better and to address these causes of problems. Erik, is it just expecting that the negative shocks will go away and then things will get better. You gave a part of an answer, but are there 1, 2, 3 things in this new world, geoeconomic world, that Germany should definitely do to be more resilient or to push to avoid such a situation like in the last 3 years?
Yeah, 100%. This is. Thanks for asking. This is really important. I mean, you said it early on. I think the first thing that's important is to understand why we are where we are. And my bottom line there is that it's relatively easily explainable by these shocks, and that the shocks are now evaporating. So everything else being equal, things are okay. But in the meantime, and particularly this past year, the world has changed dramatically, right? And it's not only Donald Trump, it's the AI revolution and what have you. So point number one, Germany spends about 4.5% of GDP on education a year. In Scandinavia, we spend 6%. That's quite a measurable difference. In China, if I'm not mistaken, kids from the age of around 12 are now being taught AI issues, and I don't know the details of it. I'm not aware if that has been introduced anywhere in Europe yet, but it's high time, right? It's not only about money, obviously, although the story are multiple of underfunding of schools in Germany, in parts of Germany at least. So I would say education, and it starts from primary schools, but it also includes a great need and it would be a fantastic thing, particularly on the European level or among the willing, if one could set aside a couple of billion euros or a little bit more to build proper cutting-edge technology universities, maybe in coordination with the private sector to harvest this whatever they can do. So this is important. So that whole thing, number one. Number two, Germany needs more than ever to change from being export-led to domestic demand-led story. And this has to do with national security, but it has also to do with the simple reality that the export markets are changing. And Sebastian showed very powerfully with China. And I would argue probably the same goes for export to America. Here's my fundamental point on this issue. When you have a current account surplus, you are having a savings surplus vis-a-vis the rest of the world. Why are Germans choosing to invest their savings to the tune of 4 or 5% of GDP, whatever the current account surplus is at a certain time and adjusted for whatever kind of thing, abroad instead of in Germany? It is. So you can argue that part of it is in fixed income, which is the biggest part, is because a lot of the savings sits with financial institutions which are legally or regulatorily required to hold risk-free assets. I don't know the number for German institutions per se, but European financial institutions, non-bank institutions, so pension funds and insurance companies, buy on a net level about $80 billion of US treasuries a year, partly to get a higher yield than in Europe, but also because it's risk-free. In my opinion, the European regulators should say to European financial institutions, including Germany, that we think that European fixed income, and that's not only sovereigns, but also higher rated companies, are less risky than the US government in this environment. So you could regulate it in a way to encourage more money in, and importantly, change also the regulation to encourage these institutional money in your financial institution money to take more risk instead of having all in fixed income. I would go as far as considering maybe a tax on capital export in fixed income markets. Why not? We have seen Donald Trump infringe on the free movement of goods in exports via tariffs. That's a tax. We have seen China respond by direct restrictions on exports. The world has changed. Why should capital owners continue to be free to roam the world tax-free wherever they want to go and finance whatever they want in the world when there's a European need for financing development and investments in Europe? So there are things to be done. we have a savings surplus, we have the money, we can talk about capital markets union and banking union that's needed to allocate the money more efficiently. And I think Nicola said correctly on the internal market, I would say specifically for services, is absolutely necessary. And I think Germany, if I understand the European debate right, I think Germany is at the forefront in pushing for a capital markets union, or a savings and investment union as it's called now, which is unfortunately being held up by, as far as I can judge, by some of the smaller countries which have benefited from a somewhat skewed interpretation of tax and regulatory laws. So.
Okay, thank you. Sebastian, perhaps one just quick remark, then we could switch to the question from the audience.
No, I think I've also talked enough, and maybe we just move to the audience.
Okay. I find one remark quite interesting, and maybe we can come back to that before I give the word to Günther Taube, which is maybe even if the diagnosis is right that there have been these specific shocks in that new field, maybe it's a good reason to look more than before into the supply side things and bureaucracy and so on to compensate for that. But that's maybe just to keep in mind, if I translate correctly the intention of the question. Günther Taube, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, this is exactly where I was going with my question, which got triggered by when Sebastian said, well, it's not the short-term economic aspects or impact of lack of pension reform, but the long-term effect. And that leads me to the thought on structural reforms. We seem to be unable to get any significant reform going in our country, whether it's pensions, whether it's elderly care, whether it's education, health, housing market, you name it. And all of that leads to me to the effect that this only benefits the right-wing extremists, the AfD, because they can always say the government is not able to do anything. So this sort of impasse on structural reform, design, and implementation, that is really the key question for me. Why are we unable to get any significant reform going in any of these policy fields? Because that is really what we need, I think. That's my question. I have an answer. I don't have an answer, but I think it's a key question. Thank you.
Thank you. And does anyone else an answer? No, we need to think about. Any other, I mean, the question if there is something to take into account that Germany needs to compensate for whatever on the more on the supply side, if you may say, to get better prepared for the situation we are in. I mean, if I may, it doesn't seem to me as very convincing if you just discuss then these topics, as in the end, I mean, what we are confronted with is a situation where there's are trade wars, there's a very different geopolitical situation. There's China, which is flooding the markets with subsidies and subsidized electric vehicles, a German car industry, which didn't manage to do this transition. And I wonder how can whatever reforming bureaucracy or reforming Bürgergeld or even reforming pensions help in this case. It may help at some point to make problems for the industry less acute. But if they don't find any answer to get forward and to bring about this electric car transition or an answer to how to handle this in geopolitical situation, it won't help to reform Bürgergeld or bureaucracy in Germany. Maybe Nicola.
Well, first of all, so I think it's important. I do think Günther Taube has a point that it's important for people. So it's a very uncertain environment. And one thing is, I'm a bit surprised about surprised, but when Sebastian said, or Erik said the same, there's a potential for a bigger boost coming from consumption because saving is so high. That's perhaps true, but with somebody mentioned in the chat the labor shedding in industry, right? And those things, of course, well, I drag on expectations. Oh, now 2 hands are going up. We're good. But also the impression, when you get the impression, like what Günther Taube just says, oh, no reform is happening, the government is unable to resolve problems. That's a problem, indeed, because I think people need something concrete and manageable to look forward to, where they see, okay, things are going into the right directions. But I think sometimes nobody says that this isn't possible. For example, what I found amazing was when there was the big debate about the pension reform, we're not reforming, the country is not reforming the pensions. At the same time, there was an announcement of the modernization agenda. And nobody noticed it, right? So I think there are some reforms going on. There are also things that we don't like at the OECD. But I think what's really needed is to show we tackle the problems. And there are some other structural things that I'm more worried about than what we discussed so far. So Erik said quite rightly, education is really important. It's particularly important when you have a shrinking population. And I think here, the country has been, after some successes with, for example, measured by PISA, the country has been going in the wrong direction. And I think here it would be really good to have an agenda where you show, okay, we are attacking the problem, we're going to improve results, this is going to make it easier for parents to work, everybody's going to be happy, they're going to have their children, they're going to see them in places where they're learning well. And if you're able to present such an agenda, I think everybody can work with it, perhaps also make some sacrifices themselves, but have a positive vision. But this is very important to create such a vision. So I'm answering or trying to answer, Thomas, your question. So how can reforms even work? I think with bureaucracy, same thing. If you say, okay, I've set aside money to tackle the investment backlog, and I'm going to show you, and this was basically the idea behind it, I'm going to show you that it's going to work. I'm going to reduce the length of procedures. I'm going to make it more easy so that everybody that has to do investment can do it. I think this is a positive agenda for the way forward, where you say in a more complicated environment, we're doing the things that we need to do, okay? And so I think in that way, everybody can believe, okay, the transition to e-vehicles, for example, is going to work because we're going to have the infrastructure. So I think it's not, and Bürgergeld, yeah, maybe one last thing I would like to say. No, that's not the one thing that has been holding everybody back. But there's a real issue with, well, the complexity, in fact, with social transfers, and sometimes also the withdrawal rates. So I think combining those, making it easier, it may not give you a lot of savings, because actually now sometimes people don't use transfers that are eligible for it. But it can improve employment incentives, draw people out of the shadow economy, etc., and also be positive, in particular for lower income workers who are now actually burdened quite a bit by high taxes and implicit taxes on labor. So I think there are improvements to be made. And
it's maybe also a question of political energy, and we have spent enormous political energy in the last couple of months on reform and Bürgergeld for something which may at the margin help in a way or another, but the gap between the energy and the dominance of this topic for weeks and weeks, same for retirement and for pensions and for bureaucracy, if it doesn't really address the core problems, because we always had quite a complicated social system, and we always had a complicated labor market system. But until, as Sebastian showed, until 2019, this didn't hinder us to have the same per capita growth as the US. So that's what I'm lacking, or what I'm missing in Germany, to have a real more straight analytical debate on what are the real reasons and what to address, because we don't have enormous political energy. And that's maybe something for the last round also to bring in. We didn't discuss this. What is one of the most pressing challenges? It's not economic, it's the rise of the far right. And nobody discusses this. What is the real, except for Brandmauer discussions, but what people make people come back and not vote for AfD or extreme right? Maybe Erik can say something on Denmark on this. I would then, for the last round, ask Jörg Haas to have a hopefully quick question. That would be good, but because we're running out of time, and then Erik and Sebastian may answer.
No, don't. Perhaps you let them react. Well,
you will have a last round for you and Erik and Sebastian. Jörg.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, I've a fascinating debate, so thank you so much for hosting this. I am really seriously concerned, and not so much about these, short-term fluctuations in the growth rate, but the question of the second China shock, where I think we have an issue that China has been investing with China 2025 in exactly the areas where Germany has been traditionally be good at. And that's not just a problem that we are losing the Chinese market, but in third-party markets, German industry is losing competitiveness. So for me, my question to the panelists would be, what kind of strategies does Germany need to apply not to lose ground in the technologies of the future, the markets of the future, where it has traditionally been strong and now it seems to be losing out?
Okay, thanks, Jörg. Erik or Sebastian, whoever wants to start.
I can start, and then Erik has the last word. Well, on this idea that nothing is happening in Germany, I mean, it is just not true. There is a lot of things are happening, and I also think they are underreported. I mean, for example, if you talk to the big grid builders, so which build the electricity grid, they say they have cut the time for planning and getting permits by 40% or so. And if you talk to the companies, they confirm that. Yeah, so this is it's not reported. The LNG terminals, they were put online within a year or even less than that. Rheinmetall has put up new factories from the first start of building the factory to ammunition or plane production. It has been a year. This is very fast, and so there are things happening, and it is not always reported. But then we have very strange reporting about, in my eyes, well, there might be real problems, but marginal issues from a macroeconomic perspective. And so on the question, Nicola, you asked, well, aren't the people sensible in being careful and saving more? I mean, first, they are now saving much more than before, and then before for a long time. Then yes, industry or manufacturing is shedding jobs, but overall, number of jobs is roughly stable. Despite this weak economic development, wages have gone up, and we have done a survey which we haven't published yet, and we have looked which households actually say they save more, and have asked why are they saving more. And interestingly, it is the low-income households at the moment which say that they want to save more. It's not the high up; it is the older households, so those who which don't have a job anymore, don't work anymore. Interestingly, we asked, why are you saving more? And they say inflation. And I mean, inflation is gone, but obviously they still feel, I mean, even there where we know wages have picked up again, they seem to feel that they have less real purchasing power than before.
Erik.
Yes, thanks. So let me make an attempt to explain why it feels like so little is being done, although I think Sebastian made some very good examples of where something that's not so sexy to be reported actually has happened, very importantly. I mean, for many years, until not very long ago, life was pretty good in Germany and in Europe, right? I mean, in terms of per capita income, very comfortable for, say, 80% of the population or thereabout. I mean, it was, I have heard senior German politicians ask, why is it wrong just to model on, right? If things were okay, right? It's life was good. You exported a lot to China. We had America as an ally, and things looked okay. Yes, there were these fringes of society who lost out and didn't really manage to adjust to globalization, and AfD became increasingly prominent, first buying against the euro and then against immigrants, so against anybody else than yourself, as usual thing as you see for the extreme political parties everywhere, right? So that sort of moved on. My hypothesis is that this has changed, and I actually think it may also, a little bit wishful thinking maybe, has spelled the peak of the extreme political forces. What has happened particularly is that we woke up, that Trump has made America an opponent, no longer an ally. It is basically being let down by your parent, in a sense. It is a betrayal by the biggest and most important ally. And I certainly don't think it's difficult to detect throughout Europe, particularly in Germany and Scandinavia, how shocked society and people are about what has happened there. I was in Berlin at the Berlin Global Dialogue just 3 days after China had imposed restrictions on export of rare earth minerals. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the German corporate leaders who were there were in shock, right? In shock of being pulled together with America in this trade war between America and China. And everybody seemed to wake up suddenly. I go back to the issue of Trump. I mean, it's a few things. I mean, the end to the debt brake, or the adjustment of the debt brake, CDU was too shy to say it before the election. But once to the lock, if you're political lock, we had that terrible scene in the Oval Office where Zelensky was humiliated. And then there was the hook that Merz could use to say everything has changed. We have to change, right? So so there are big things that's changing here, and I think that it is very likely that some of these big reforms are coming. Now, reforms also can be disruptive and can be politically difficult, of course. Now, the reason why I say that I'm optimistic also that we may have seen the peak of the far right are twofold. The first one is, and you mentioned Denmark, where they have been marginalized significantly, basically for two reasons. The one reason is that the Social Democratic Party and some of the other center parties basically adopted their immigration policy. It's not my cup of tea, but that's what they did, and it has paid off. So the key selling point for the far right has sort of been undercut. And then they have, in the case of Denmark, and you can see signs of this in Germany also, at least just on the surface, as far as I can judge, but tell me if I'm wrong, the far right have a bit of self-implosion going on by very different fractions of somewhat extreme to extremely extreme. And you see the same here in Britain, where Farage's party is out basically putting fire out on a daily basis because members of his party are outright racist or anti-Semitic and other things where so they are firefighting a lot in order. It's difficult to build a big political grouping without getting some really problematic fellows in, and this restricts the appetite for the general public. So, and then finally, we saw it in the Netherlands. If the center can put up a optimistic view that there are ways of dealing it, acknowledging the issues, but also not just saying we go back to where we were and more of the same. This is the problem in my assessment for the Democratic Party in America. How do you say, yeah, no, we understand what Trump is appealing to, but let's go back to what we had? That doesn't work, right? So I think we are learning. The center is learning that it requires something different, and we have to acknowledge that there are people in society who have been falling off and are justifiably upset, and that has to be dealt with. So I'm actually coming back to my opening statement. I'm moderately optimistic. When growth picks up, and we all seem to agree that it will pick up. We can discuss whether it's to 1 or 1.5 or sort of thing. That picks up, and as the external threats are becoming increasingly or have become very visible, it will be my prediction, but only with so much confidence that nobody knows the future, that we may have seen the turning point coming in terms of reforms and therefore move to an adjustment to this new world.
Thank you, Erik. I think it's anyway important to discuss all that and to also take into account serious arguments when it comes to bureaucracy or Bürgergeld or whatever. The disturbing thing in Germany is that for weeks and weeks you don't have any discussion about this fundamental, diagnosis anymore. It's like unified in a way, and everyone is repeating and repeating and repeating the same things without getting back to the fundamental idea and the question: what are the real problems, and does what we are doing really help to solve these problems? In that sense, we wanted to make a tiny contribution to remind this and to maybe then look forward and to find better answers, whatever they are. And Nicola, maybe last word on this.
I should be brief. I just wanted to say I'm not sure that we answered Jörg's question, and it's not easy to answer, I have to say. But let me try a little bit. I think Jörg is quite right. So Germany in the 2010s, right, was quite successful, sort of exploiting its mid-tech strength, and now China, one of the big markets, has sort of become a competitor. And what's important, I think, is really to move now and become an innovator again, as Erik likes to stress. Germany has done that in the past, Germany and Europe, I would like to say. And there's a lot of, let's say, in the AI race, exploiting the data, industry data. There's still a lot to exploit for Germany and Europe, but it's important also politically to show a little bit a way forward. I'm quite optimistic that what, for example, a new digitalization ministry is trying to do, Deutschland's etc., can do part of the trick. But another area is certainly skills. So we haven't talked about the fact that digital skills are low in a big part of the population. So you need, at schools, you need a plan, but also for workers, for older people, in order for digitalization to work. And then Sebastian mentioned inflation, and it has gone down. That's right. So perhaps people will just realize that there is in Germany, like in many other countries, a real housing problem, I think, and it has become very expensive. And I think for people to be satisfied and see a good way forward, it's also important to basically address this problem, make sure people can find housing with their wages live. And if there's sort of a political program that can demonstrate this is possible to do, reasonable effort, then I think there can be, well, a more positive, everybody can perhaps join in Erik's positive mood and things can become a bit brighter again.
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. I think that's very important what you said on housing. There's a lot of debate in the US and otherwise around this notion of affordability and things like this. And if you talk to people, I mean, that's what they are concerned about, and it's much more serious than some of the other problems that are discussed, sometimes very emotionally. And to finish, maybe it's also smart to say, in these times, and it's maybe in Germany more than in other places, as far as I can see, there are also interest groups who step in and, for the political economy arguments that you only get reforms in difficult times. So that seems to be the strategy of some of the lobbies and others. And that makes it even more difficult to distinguish between the real problems and those who are very much pushed with this argument. We need, to do now and to make pressure on people and that they need to suffer and so on, because we are in the midst of this very dangerous crisis. And that's the danger. Then it becomes self-fulfilling, and then you make the wrong decisions. So that's my final point on this. If there's no other comments, and there are a lot of comments, a lot of questions we didn't bring in directly in the chat, in the audience, and as usual, we will copy them. We will send them to the discussants, and if ever you feel that you want to answer one of these questions, we will put them into our real life and our recaps, so they are not lost. Many thanks, Eric, Nicola, Sebastian, for this very inspiring discussion, and have a nice time, end of year time, very high time, difficult times before they get better at the end of the year with the break for all of us personally. So have a good time and see you back next year. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.